When something is physically wrong with us, let's say you have depression, or you're under medication, or you're on a drug, the thoughts that are going through your head, you're creating always. Does the universe accept those as creations in the same level as they would if you were okay? I mean, does the universe differentiate that, okay, this being is under a drug and is creating strangely, that doesn't mean it?
Well, your point of attraction has been established long before you took the drug. In other words, often when you utilize a drug that diminishes your ability to focus, it puts you in a more allowing state than it does a more disallowing state. Of course, there are variables in all of that, but the important answer to this important question is any moment in time is not significant enough to really influence any outcome. In other words, it feels to you like that as you say, oh, well, if I had just done this differently, or if I had just done this differently. Esther said, if we had just left 30 seconds sooner, we would have been under that before they closed it. And yet they were only detained about 10 minutes. That's about how long it took them to make up their mind that they could do something about it. And so no moment in time is really all that significant. There are these culminating moments where you say, oh, if I'd been someplace else, but we want to say to you, you can't be someplace else. In other words, there are no near misses. Everything that happens to you is a long-standing culmination. That's why we say you have huge leeway. You have huge opportunities to mold your vibration into different places before there is manifestation. So we would not worry about a moment in time when I am taking a drug and having some sort of response to it as being a very big part of, in other words, let's take someone who takes drugs and is said by society to now be unsafe driving, and in their intoxicated or drugged condition, they have an accident where they are killed or hurt or others are. And the common consensus is that it was the influence of that drug that caused that accident. Where what we would rather that you understand is that that person was headed for that one way or another. In other words, that was their vibrational proclivity. And usually, if you have an opportunity to visit with them, they're full of anger, or they're full of depression, or they're full of hatred. In other words, they've got all kinds of things that have been going on. They've had some pretty raucous, active vibrations happening within them. And yes, they are desperately trying to soothe that pain with drugs, but their point of attraction wasn't about the drug. Their point of attraction was about the way they were thinking and the way they were feeling. And often it happened when they were young. Often it happened a long time ago. They just don't know that they now get to choose what vibration is dominant. They just keep repeating whatever got started way back when, you say.
But in effect, it is being accepted at that time by the universe as what you want.
It is the path of least resistance. In other words, the universe is always attempting to give you what you want. What you're living is what you're letting in. And when you are living very different from what you want, and you are literally screaming for things to be different, the universe is hearing what you're asking for and is yielding it to you. And how that translates in your experience is the energy of your life is really moving fast. But if you have all of these thoughts that are vibrationally different from the desire that you are calling through, now you have this huge resistance. So it's like a tug-of-war on you. In other words, you're summoning energy that you're not allowing. And that's that tragic feeling that you are sort of describing here. And under those conditions, that's usually where health failures occur. That's usually where traffic accidents occur. People who want very little, who have very little resistance, they're not in those crises places. That's why so many people are wanting to teach you to lower your desire, to have no desire, to keep yourself without wanting, as if you could. In other words, you can't. But that's what that is about.
Do we have a one-on-one relationship with our source energy, with our inner being?
Absolutely.
So it's not like one inner being has 16 of us running around or something.
Maybe, but in other words, source is a stream, not a clump. And so understand that all that is a stream of consciousness, and that it can be focused in many, many ways. In other words, we are expressing as if we are one voice because we are coming through one voice box.
But I mean our personal inner being.
Well, your personal inner being is not different from what you're hearing here, in the sense that your inner being is connected to others that are vibrationally the same. So you are always connected to this broad consciousness that in its ultimate form is that which man calls God. In other words...
Right. So, wait, maybe it's me today. My inner being,
But what it is you have beliefs that are vibrating. And as you ask questions from your point of belief, and we explain from our point of understanding, if your point of belief does not jive with our point of knowing, you can't hear us. Maybe. Someone the other day said, Abraham, why don't you ever give me a straight answer? And we said, we are trying to give you an answer that you can hear. Yes.
You're probably right, because I really wanted you to tell me that we are one-on-one, that my inner being is just me, you know? And what you're saying is it's possible for my inner being to have others. And that wasn't the answer I wanted to hear. So yeah, you're probably
sorry about that.
Yeah. Could you change your answer? No.
We could tell you fairy tales that have no relationship to what we know to be, but there is enough of that going around already.
Okay. Abraham, do you ever answer a question yes or no?
Yes.
Good. Because during the break, I was speaking to various people in the group, and there's still some question in the minds of some people regarding the question I asked earlier. So I'm going to ask for a yes or no answer so that everyone who didn't get it gets it. Does my inner being have other beings that it is an inner being to, whether it's on this planet or another planet or someone else, or is it exclusive to me? Yes or no? Is it exclusive to me, yes or no?
No.
No, okay.
Does your inner being express through others? Yes. Is that always the case? Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Are we right? Yes. Are you wrong? Some questions are better left unanswered.
Can you make a mistake, Abraham? Can you make an error?
It can appear that way to one who is not vibrationally where we are. Everything is perceptual. What brings forth your question?
Because I think you made a mistake. And I asked Jerry about it, and he said to ask you. So I'm asking you. Oh, you want to know what?
They do.
They do, yeah. Okay. As I was driving up here in my car, one of your tapes is going. And on this particular tape, the story you told about the man in the car teaching the kids Spanish and on the tape, it was asked a man from the audience came up and told that story as part of a question.
It was that man.
See, and you said it was Jerry, but on the tape, it was a man from the audience that asked a question about consciousness.
The man on the tape is Jerry.
Is Jerry. Okay.
You see, this is a wonderful thing. We really want to talk with you about this because your assumption was that it was someone from the audience. And so...
See, I didn't know Jerry asked questions during the session.
Well, that would make you wrong and us right.
No. I didn't know.
They're just playing with you. But you see, what happens here is that these assumptions are very powerful, aren't they? In other words, as you came to a very valid conclusion there because you were not aware of that. It doesn't happen very often anymore. Jerry used to be a much stronger contributor when the audiences were smaller. And now only occasionally, when he just cannot hold himself back, does he turn on his own microphone or even occasionally come and sit in the hot seat while someone is coming around. Mm-hmm. But because you were not aware of that, and as you listened to the recording, not expecting to hear his voice and therefore not recognizing his voice, your assumption is it is someone else telling the story. So then when you hear us tell the same story, nearly identically, then you think something is wrong. And what is wrong here was your perception. And what we are wanting you to understand, we love this. We love that you bring this forth in this way, because this is what we are talking about when you bring forth your very powerful first question about how is it that do people really choose death? And we say you are choosing all kinds of things through perception that may or may not have anything to do with the reality that you're wanting to live. In other words, often your perception is not even accurate to the events. Have you ever seen eyewitnesses to the same event give all kinds of different reflections? And the reason for that is when you live through an account of something, the way it plays out for you is always more about who you were before you got there than it was about what happened. This is all about this vibration. It is a wonderful example. Has anyone else heard that tape where Jerry is telling the story? And knowing Jerry, did you recognize it as his voice? And so what we are getting at here, we're not looking for support. We understand what is happening. What we are wanting to give to you is that when you have decided something, and people do it all the time, you cannot hear past the vibration, and it's not because you're not willing, it's not because you're not wise, it's not because you're not smart, it's not because you're not worthy, it's because you got a vibration going that something else cannot overtake. In other words, that's what we're talking about all day, every day here, is perception and what you are allowing into your experience, you see. It is a wonderful thing. And sometimes when something like that happens, it happens to Jerry and Esther all the time, where Esther will assume something, or Jerry will. Something will happen where one or the other of them will assume something based upon who they are, based upon other things that have happened, and their assumption is totally the opposite of what the other knows to be, or even of what reality is. And it's always a very interesting thing to watch them come round to a recognizing. And sometimes with both of them, there is a feeling of stubbornness. In other words, it almost feels impossible that the other one cannot hear and know what the other one knows. And because they are always playful and loving about it, it usually unfolds into a very fun experience as they realize their minds were locked in to something that had nothing to do with either what they wanted or with the reality of things. In other words, impressions are very powerful because law of attraction is behind them.
I'm very glad that we're talking about this, because it rocked my belief for a minute there. You know, I was like, oh my God, she made a mistake, or Abraham made a mistake, which I thought was impossible.
Well, we would like it to be all right with you.
For you to make a mistake? I would rather you didn't.
The reason that we think that that would serve you is because there is this belief that truth is truth, when truth is perception. So when it's necessary to you that we always be right, that does not allow you any deviation in perspective. And we want you to be free to have your own perspective. We do not ask you to join us in perspective. In other words, if your house is on fire and the fireman comes and knocks out your windows and sprays water in the house, you say, this was a very good thing. But if he comes on a day when there is no fire and knocks out your window and sprays water in, you say, well, that's not such a good thing. And you say, well, Abraham, that's silly. That's easy to understand the difference in that. And we say, sometimes it's not so easy to understand the difference. We don't want you to need us to always be right through your perspective. We want you to understand that we are source energy, that we understand the laws, that we are explaining them to you, that we understand that you are doing the best that you can do, that you understand that we are all doing the best that we can do. And if you don't fight so hard to make anything have to always be right, then it will be easier for you to relax your vibration into that which is most beneficial to you. In other words, there are endless ways. Did you hear us earlier when we were talking about once you ask and source answers? Source answers you in so many ways. And through the crack of least resistance, you finally, or not, let it in or don't. In other words, the source is answering endlessly. And so when you start saying, well, it has to be right, you begin limiting your ability to receive and allow. There are so many people that are so right in their way and so wrong from your point of view. And if they need to be right in order for you to feel good, then somebody has to limit something.